best podcast, the Heidelminicast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Dear listener, I have a question for you. Why do Christians love legal preaching so much?
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
You should subscribe to the Heidelcast in any podcast app, and you should subscribe to the Heidelblog by going to heidelblog.net/subscribe, and you will get for free all kinds of good stuff in your pod app and your inbox.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.
When I first started talking about legal preaching, I got some pushback, and people weren't paying attention exactly to what I was saying. So let me give this disclaimer. All biblical and Reformed preachers must preach the law in both the pedagogical and normative uses, right? The first and third uses, and then even the second use, right? Depending on who's numbering them. Any preacher that doesn't preach the law in its uses, all three, is not preaching the whole counsel of God. So this podcast is not a diatribe against preaching the law. It is, however, a diatribe against the abuse of the law.
Heidelcast.
Let's define our terms. A legal preacher is a preacher who majors in the law to the neglect of the gospel. In practice, he really preaches nothing but law. He thinks that mentioning Jesus periodically or even regularly means that, well, he's not a legal preacher, and he can't really imagine that people are concerned about the tenor of his preaching because he doesn't see anything wrong with it. It's the sort of preaching that he heard as a young man. It's the sort of preaching he heard in seminary, and it's the sort of preaching he admires in other preachers. He turns every passage into a law because he doesn't know any other way to read the scripture, and he doesn't know any other way to preach. He preaches the law, and he doesn't even know he's doing it, even when in his mind he's preaching the gospel. When he finds a bit of good news in his passage, he doesn't end with that because he doesn't want his people to get the idea that there are no obligations to the Christian life. He's heard talk about a distinction between law and gospel, but he's pretty sure that's a Lutheran way to think and talk. And beside, he never heard that when he went to seminary, and he went to a good school where, if it were important, he would have heard about it. He's suspicious of the fellows who do talk about law and gospel. They don't seem to be nearly as interested in sanctification and obedience as they should be. Certainly, those fellows aren't as interested in it as he is, and he suspects those people are just lazy. He's heard about the federal vision and the new perspective, but it was a lot of reading, and he really hasn't had the time. He's had other things on his plate. He's not really sure what the big deal is. After all, those guys in Moscow, they seem like pretty good fellows. They believe the Bible, and they understand that the culture is going to pot right around us, and they publish some pretty good things on the family and school. Ever so often he mentions grace and faith, but he doesn't dwell on them or get caught up in them. When salvation comes up in a passage, for example, the crossing of the Red Sea, he covers it, but he doesn't leave the people there. In his application, he presses them as to whether they really believe it enough and whether they've really obeyed God. Is God really pleased with them? He doesn't want them to become lazy or presumptuous. We all know what the gospel is, after all. In our age, what we really need to do is get busy applying the scriptures to everyday life and getting after the hard work of obedience and sanctification. One of his parishioners once asked him, "Pastor, are you unhappy with us? You seem dissatisfied with us." And he thought to himself, "Yep, that's right. I'm really not satisfied with you folks, and why should I be? You have a long way to go." Our legal preacher doesn't know the law from the gospel, the good news from the bad news. To him, all of Scripture is law, and all of it is gospel. These are just two sides of the same coin. There's really no difference between them. The gospel is that God is sovereign and that he has sovereignly decreed his will for his people. Ironically, his second problem is at bottom that he doesn't really know the first use of the law. For the legal preacher, It's all gift, and it's all guidance. He hasn't been smitten by the law, struck by its righteous, powerful blows. Or if he has, it's been so long ago that he's forgotten the horror of his own sin. He doesn't see the law for what it is, a completely holy and righteous condemnation of all sinners, a terrible and relentless judgment that will swallow him up and from which he needs a deliverer. Third, because he doesn't see the law for what it is, he no longer sees himself for what he is, apart from grace, a vessel of wrath and condemnation. Yes, he knows it intellectually, that he's a sinner, but his sins seem almost vanilla, pedestrian, compared to those he's faced as a pastor, those he's had to address in a session meeting or consistory meeting or in the counseling room. Sometimes when he prays the prayer of confession during the service, he is hard-pressed of anything to confess. Fourth, not surprisingly, he isn't really enamored with the gospel. Sometimes when he hears people going on about how great the gospel is, he's not really sure what they're talking about because it hasn't gripped him personally, at least not for a long time. Fifth, he has a lot of folks aiding and abetting him. The congregation likes his sermons. They like the lists that he gives them. They like the practical, detailed instructions he gives them about the Christian life. He knows how to make his congregation feel guilty. He's heard their confessions. He knows their struggles. He knows which buttons to push. They've come to find a kind of satisfying guiltiness in his preaching. They know that they've been to church because they felt that familiar pang of guilt, and they leave knowing that they need to do better. The preacher's grim face is a reminder of God's attitude toward them. And there's a final problem. As a legal preacher, he has control of his people, of his church, of his session or consistory, of his whole life, his identity. As long as people have the idea that they have to do something to earn favor with God or to keep favor with God, the preacher is in charge. The moment that they learn it's a free gift, he's no longer the boss. He's just a minister announcing good news. That is a demotion for which he is not ready.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.